all of us have friends. Even Rob has friends. I've heard. I mean, all of us have got friends, and really the question is, to what level are they a friend? Because we have all kinds of different friends in our lives, and the truth is, not everybody in our life is our best friend forever, are they? And so I want to look a little bit about friendships today, and we're kicking off our new series, Relationship Goals. It's a series about relationships, all kinds of relationships that we have in our lives. Today we're going to be talking about friends, but we have relationships with coworkers, we have relationships with other family, we have dating relationships that we're a part of, we even have marriage relationships. We're going to talk about all of these kinds of relationships, and we're going to talk about a little bit of the reality that in some of those relationships there are healthy things that we do, and then there are some unhealthy things that strain our relationships or strain our friendships, and learn to recognize what some of those are, and maybe even discover some next steps we can take to move towards healthy relationships. So today we're talking about friendships. Some of the most basic of our friendships, but as we talked about, I mean, not everybody is your close best friend in the world. And I think a lot of us would probably agree, we use that word friend, but in many cases, we don't have a lot of friends, we maybe have a lot of acquaintances. I mean, if we really think about it, we don't have a lot of friends per se, but we do have a lot of acquaintances in our lives. And I don't know if it's the same for you as for me, that group of people that I call my best friends, my BFFs, that is maybe a handful of people or even less. There's just not a lot of those. So we've got acquaintances, we've got best friends forever, and kind of everything in between. But that group of people, that inner core group of people we call our best friends, that's a special group of people. I hope you have some in your life. I mean, it's a group of people that in many ways know you better than you know yourself. They've just done life with you so much. They oftentimes can think something before you're even thinking it. It's the sort of person, maybe you don't talk to them every day. You may not even talk with them every week. But when you reconnect with them down the road, it's as if you pick the conversation off right where you left it and you just keep going. Do you got any friends like that you just pick it up right where you're at? Those are special relationships, and I want to look more into what is it that brings healthy relationships in our lives, but also look at some of those things in our lives that bring unhealthy relationships in our lives. And I thought, you know what, the timing on this was so cool as we're talking about community groups that are launching this weekend and people that are going to start doing life together and get to know each other and all those things. And I started thinking, you know what, there's just this reality that as this group of people come together that may or may not know each other, they all come from different walks of life, different past. They all have their own burdens and their own baggage and their own set of things, and they kind of land on each other and do life. And I've learned over the years to recognize that there's some people that kind of show up to every group and to be alert to them. And I wanted to kind of talk about them first before we talk a little bit about some things that strain our friendships in life. But these are some people that you might come across, not only in your small group, but maybe some of these exist in the workplace where you're at or in your family dynamic, whatever it may be. The first person that I tend to recognize in a group when I'm in it, I call this person the dominator. It's the dominator. This is the person that owns 80% of the conversation when you're in the group. This is the person that speaks first, and they kind of overpower everybody when they're speaking, and they're usually right. At least they think so, right? And you better be careful before challenging them because, man, they've got the answers. Anybody have a dominator that they've seen in their groups? And dominators need to be reminded, hey, you need to share this time in this space with everyone else. This is a group event. Another person that we come across, I call the TMI. This is the too much information person. They have no filter. They're just going to tell it the way it is, and they're just going to tell all the details of the story, and they oftentimes leave you with those kind of weird, awkward moments that you're not real sure about. I was thinking through a time, Christy and I, my wife, we were in a group, we were listening to some guy tell a story, and he was talking about the fact that, his back hurt, so he went to a massage therapist to get his back rubbed, only this was one of those questionable places that he went to. And so he's telling the story how they're massaging, and then how this therapist went and started massaging in areas he wasn't supposed to be massaging. And if you're getting uncomfortable, you can imagine how we felt right about that time in the conversation. And he just laid it out there for us all. When he stopped, you could have just heard a pin drop in the room, as we're all like, what in the world do we do with that? You've got to take that TMI person and kind of just say, hey, we got to watch some of those stories that you're telling. Maybe a little bit of a filter would be good. The next person that may show up to your group is the nerd. The nerd wants to come in and tell you all the Hebrew words they know in Leviticus, and they're going to help you memorize Philemon. Now, while they are the perfect person to have on your Bible challenge team, they can also, though, intimidate people in the group. They can make the people in the group feel like they're not good enough or not smart enough, and you have to take them aside and say, listen, we got to meet people where they are in the journey. Another person's the comedian. And I'm not talking about the fact that we have joy and laughter. I want our groups to have joy and laughter. I enjoy joy and laughter. The comedian, though, is the person who cannot stand serious moments at all. I mean, if something starts moving towards a serious moment or a serious conversation, they depart from it like the Black Plague. And they're going to tell a joke. They're going to do something to break up the serious moment because they are very uncomfortable in those moments. And we have to tell the comedians, hey, sometimes we've got to walk down these roads. Sometimes we've got to have these difficult conversations. Let them happen. The next person is the church mouse. The church mouse is the regular attender to church. They are sweet, wonderful, nice people, but they're never going to say a word in your group. Not once. They're just going to sit there quietly, and they're going to take it all in, and they're going to absorb it, and you'd better think twice before you ask them to pray in front of the group, because they aren't going to do it, but they're going to be there in the group. The last couple ones, the problem solvers. The problem solvers are there to fix you. They have the answers. They're going to fix you, and they've got usually a one-liner. If you just do this, man, your problem is solved. I don't know about you, but that drives me bananas when they do that. And the problem solvers, the fixers, you've got to take them aside and say, hey, you know what? Different people are at different places in their journey. You got to let them move through those areas in their journey. And the last one is the one we've all seen before, the guy who does not want to be there. He's there because his wife said he had to be there, and he's well aware of the fact that there's another football game going on the TV, but his wife said this is good for him. So he's there. Good luck with that guy. I don't have any advice for you on that one. And there's probably others as well, too. There are. But that's what's great about the group dynamic. When you come together, different people are going to come at it from different places, and we start doing life together. And sometimes those conversations and those directions we're going are healthy, but sometimes they're not. That's why I always love people who are like, well, church, I don't like going to church because it's just messy. And I say, well, yeah, what do you think happens when you put a bunch of messy people in one room? Messy stuff. Same thing in a group, man. When a bunch of people, messy people, and we're all messy people, start doing life together, sometimes things go well, sometimes they don't. And we learn that in life too, and in our friendships and in our relationships that we have around us. There's some things that are healthy in our relationships, and there are some things that strain our relationships, and we need to be aware of what those things are. Tonight I want to talk about 5 things in particular, I think, that strain our friendships and can make them difficult. There could be more, but these are 5 in particular big ones, I think, that often strain our relationships. These are going to be your fill-ins on the back of your worship guide if you want to follow along. The first thing, and is sometimes the most dangerous one of them all, that can affect our relationships is jealousy. Jealousy. When jealousy enters into a relationship, it can have a very negative impact on that relationship. See, jealousy is when we get envious and we want something that doesn't belong to us. Somebody has something that we want, or they're able to do something that we can't do. And we become unhappy and dissatisfied. And when that happens, it creates a tension in the relationship. And while that can manifest itself in many ways, there's 2 in particular I kind of want to focus on. The first one is when jealousy enters relationship, when envy enters relationship, it can result in passive aggressiveness. Have you ever been around a passive aggressive person before? They love to just kind of throw little jabs out, plant little seeds. They're never going to tell you really what's on their mind, but they're just going to hint at it here and there and just throw out those special little things for you every now and then. And the problem with a passive-aggressive person is it can be a little bit of a death by paper cut. Have you ever heard that before? It's just these little cuts over and over again that maybe at the time really aren't that painful, but after a while and a number of cuts, that little cut becomes a big cut and becomes a large wound. And that's what happens when you're around a passive-aggressive person is they're just constantly throwing these little jabs and they're throwing these little hints. They're never really saying what's on their mind. They're just kind of getting it out there. And over time, it just builds up and becomes a real problem in the relationship. I was reminded of passive-aggressive in a commercial I saw not too long ago about FedEx. Watch this commercial with me.
Now that FedEx has helped us simplify our e-commerce, we can focus on bigger issues, like our passive-aggressive environment.
We're not passive-aggressive.
Hey. There are no bad suggestions here, no matter how lame they are.
Well said, Anne. I've always admired how you just say what's in your head without thinking. Very brave.
Good point, Ted. You're living proof that looks aren't everything.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So, FedEx helps simplify our e-commerce business, and this is not a passive-aggressive environment.
I just want to say you guys are doing a great job.
What's that supposed to mean?
FedEx, helping.
You ever been in a conversation like that where someone's just dropping those little hints like that and it seems friendly and there's a smile with it, but really it's hurtful, isn't it? And that can manifest itself when jealousy enters a relationship. It can come to passive aggressiveness. The other thing it can manifest itself into is competitiveness in a relationship. Now, there's good competitiveness in a relationship and there's bad. I mean, there's the sort of competitiveness friends can have where they challenge each other to raise the bar, to be better than they can be, to do something they wouldn't normally be able to accomplish on their own. That's good competitiveness. But there's also another kind of competitiveness where the other person feels bad, that you make them feel bad for being good at something. Maybe they've accomplished something that you couldn't accomplish, or maybe they've done something, or maybe they beat you and now you don't feel good and you feel lesser of a person. And when that sort of competitiveness enters the relationship, it becomes harmful to the relationship. And now what was healthy competitiveness moves to a painful, hurtful competitiveness. And you've got to be careful of that when it happens. And what ends up happening too is not only can you make someone feel bad because they did well, but have you ever been in a situation where you're around a friend and you know, this hurts their feelings when I beat them at this, or when I do this, I know it makes them feel bad. So you know what? I'm just not going to try as hard, or I'm going to let them win on this. At that point, now we've allowed negative competitiveness to hurt us. And instead of in a strong friendship where two people challenge each other to be better than they could ever be, now you're downplaying what you're doing, or you're becoming less so that this person doesn't feel bad, or so that you don't hurt their feelings. That's what happens when jealousy and envy can enter the relationship. And the Bible had a word for jealousy and envy. It called it coveting. And we talked about coveting when we were going through the Keep to the Code series. It's the 10th commandment. Thou shalt not covet. We talked about the fact that coveting was unique to the other 9 commandments. In fact, the rabbis sometimes referred to it and said, while it was the 10th, it was sometimes the first commandment. Because what was unique about coveting is while all the other commandments were outside of ourselves, when I lie, it's something I do outside of myself. When I cheat or when I worship another God, these are all things I do outside of ourselves. But a person could be coveting and we would never know it. Why? Because coveting starts in the heart. Coveting first starts in the heart and eventually manifests itself in our actions. And that is why I say jealousy and envy and coveting is so dangerous to a relationship, because it reveals the condition of the heart. If you struggle with jealousy, if you're jealousy of someone else, or you've allowed jealousy in a friendship, it is something where you need a heart checkup. It is something where you need to ask the Lord to reveal to you, what is this thing in my heart that's not allowing me to have this healthy relationship and to be jealous? Or why is this person jealous with me? The second thing we need to watch out for in our relationships is this: it's selfishness. You ever been around a selfish person? Ever been in a selfish relationship? If you're saying no, it might be you. Just FYI. Selfish people, it's all about them, isn't it? I mean, how many Jasons does it take to screw in a light bulb, right? Just one to hold it and let the world revolve around him, right? That was a fairly advanced joke. I was seeing if you were awake. But for a selfish person, everything revolves around them, doesn't it? And when that happens, the relationship becomes lopsided. There's one in the relationship who's giving, and there's one in the relationship who's taking. Have you ever been in a relationship where it seems like you were giving and giving and giving, but nothing in return? The other person just seems to be taking. And when you're in that sort of relationship, over time it begins to disintegrate the trust and the intimacy and the love in that relationship, because you can't have a lopsided relationship where one person's doing all the giving and one person's doing all the taking. Selfishness demands that you put somebody else's wants, needs, and desires above your own. The Bible's term for that was submitting. We submit to one another, Paul said. That means that we put our wants, needs, and desires sometimes underneath someone else's so that they can experience the love, so that they can learn what they need to learn in this, so that they can receive in the relationship as well too. Selfishness can be so destructive to friendships when it becomes lopsided and goes uncontrolled for long periods of time. The third one is one that I've struggled with in my own life, and many people do as well too. And it's another one that's so destructive, and that's controlling. Controlling. Have you ever been around a control freak before? Or a person who was controlling? Did you enjoy it? I don't. I don't know about you. Controllers can be so destructive to a relationship. And really, we learn that, what's at the core of that control is fear. A controller is afraid things will not turn out the way they want them to turn out, or they think that they should turn out. And so they work harder and harder to try to make them turn out and become the way they think it should become. And that's when we get to the very definition of what a controller is. You say, Jason, what's a controller? And I say it's a person who manipulates and massages their situation to get their desired outcome. They will lie, they will cheat, they will massage the facts and the data. They will try to do anything they can to tell the story the way they want to tell the story, or get someone to do what they think they should do. And most of us struggle with control. It is the sin of the garden. I know what to do with this piece of fruit better than God does, right? And so the reason we don't like to be controlled is because the only thing a controller hates worse than anything else in the world is being controlled by another controller. And when that happens, the relationship gets tense, and over time things build up, and eventually they come to a head because people can only be controlled for so long. And what I tell you is this: why controlling behaviors is so destructive is that control is actually the opposite of love. Have you ever thought about that? And I get it. Someone says, no, Jason, the opposite of love is hate. You see, hate's still an emotion. You still feel something. In fact, oftentimes hate comes from love being damaged. No, the opposite of love isn't hate. The opposite of love is when you go numb and don't care. When you have no feeling at all. And that's at the root of control, believe it or not. Because a controller sees you as a chess piece in their game of life. And they're going to move that chess piece wherever they want without any thought or consideration to how that affects that person. And nobody wants to feel like a chess piece in somebody else's game of life. They don't. But controllers don't realize that this act of controlling others while they think they're helping is actually hurting, and it's the opposite of love. That's why God gives us a free will. That's why we have a decision to make as to whether or not we will receive Christ, whether we will serve God, because when you don't have a choice, you're just a robot. If you were created just to do what God wants you to do, that's not love. You're given a choice. No choice, no love. And what controllers do oftentimes is they take the choice away. And we don't like it. And it is so destructive. It is so harmful to our relationships. Some of the ways that control rears its ugly head, there's many, but some of the easy ones are being critical. You ever been around a real critical person? And they use their critical spirit to help others feel bad or to help them see things a certain way. They try to make someone feel like a piece of junk so that they can then control them and tell them who they are and what they think of them. But don't let anyone convince you. Don't let anyone tell you you're a piece of junk. God doesn't make junk, okay? None of you are a piece of junk. The second thing is this: they manipulate, as we've talked about already. Manipulators are people who are constantly probing and looking for your weaknesses. You ever been around somebody and you just say, you know, it just seems like they're looking for my weakness. They want to weigh in. When they find your weakness, they're going to use it against you. It's an open door to come in and use those controlling behaviors in your life. And the third one I've seen way too many times in life too. These are what I call the exploders. You ever been around somebody that has an uncontrolled temper? Somebody who you doing life with them is like walking on eggshells or glass around them. They have these explosive tempers, and they use these explosive tempers to get their way, to try to make the circumstances go the direction they want. They get them when they get fearful and they get upset. The controller uses their anger and their temper to keep you off balance so that they can control you. And doing life with an exploder is like walking through a minefield. You just never know when you're going to step on a mine and they're going to go off. But when you come around someone that's got an explosive temper, oftentimes that's a sign of a controlling spirit. They're using that to keep people off balance around them. The next big thing that can get it in a relationship or find its way in a relationship is insecurity. Oftentimes, insecurity enters into a relationship. And there's many ways that can play out as well too, but there's a couple I want to look at in particular. The first one is possessiveness. You ever been around a possessive person? Possessive people don't have any sense of boundaries with other people. They're demanding of your time. They're demanding of your attention. They want to know where you are, where you've been, where are you going. They don't understand privacy. They don't understand why you would not want to spend 24 hours a day with them. Possessive people can be so dangerous to a relationship, and we have to be careful of them. The second one is, I could have named as a character of someone who could show up to your small group, but I decided to put that here. But you might see this person in your small group and be aware of them as well too. That's the person I call the pit of despair. You ever seen that person where drama just seems to follow them wherever they go? Now, I want to time out for a minute here. All of us walk through bad seasons of life. All of us have times where things don't go the way we thought they were going to go, or life has a way of throwing curveballs at us. And the church needs to be there to gather around to support you through those times, to help you through those times. I'm not talking about that. That's doing life together. What I'm talking about is that person where drama seems to follow them every single day of their life, no matter where they go and what they do. Have you ever been around somebody like that? Their life just seems to be one big drama that wants to suck everybody around them in. That's the pit of despair I'm talking about. That's the person that can show up to your small group and hijack it every single week if you're not careful. Because every week ends up being a personal therapy session for them to help them get out of whatever situation they're walking through. You have to watch that. You have to speak into that. You have to take that person aside, and you have to put some boundaries up on that. And you have to say, hey, we can't do this every single week. Even in your life, I've had to look at some folks and just say, I love you, but I can't be in your drama every single day. I love you. It doesn't mean I don't. I just can't be in it every single day of your life, man. I need a break. Happens when insecurity is in the relationship. The last one is this. And this is the one that will light my fire. Disloyalty. Disloyalty in the relationship. Nobody wants to feel like they just got stabbed in the back. And maybe you've been in that situation where you confided something in a friend and you walk away from it and you're like, I feel good. I'm so glad I was able to talk to someone about that, only to find out your thing's on the 6 o'clock evening news and is now trending on YouTube. You know what I mean? Nobody wants to be betrayed by another friend. And when that happens, more and more so, the relationship disintegrates. It's like a trust fund in life with money. You keep taking money out of that trust fund, what happens? Eventually that trust fund is empty, isn't it? It's the same in life. What happens when you keep borrowing money from the trust fund of life? It eventually gets to a point where you no longer trust each other or you no longer trust that person. And it disintegrates the relationship. What are some ways that friends can be disloyal? Lying. You ever had a friend or relative? I was thinking of one when I was writing this. We had one when I was growing up. It seems like every time they speak, you're spending some time afterwards trying to figure out what part of it was true and what part of it wasn't true. You ever had someone like that in your life? I mean, you're always on guard with them. You're kind of always tense because you're like, you just know. You're like, how do you know they're lying? Because they open their mouth. I mean, you just kind of know. You know, and so you're always kind of debriefing after the conversation. You're like, all right, what piece of that was true, what wasn't true, and what am I going to do with that? Lying is so destructive to the trust in the relationship. The other we've kind of already hinted at, gossip. Gossip is destructive to a relationship. In a work setting, we call that the meeting after the meeting. You know, you talk, everyone nods their head, everyone smiles, everything gets great, and then suddenly there's that other meeting, you know, out in the sidewalk in front where there's a whole different story going on, and it took a left turn. Yeah, gossip is destructive because none of us see it, none of us hear what's going on, and so it's not fair. And hear me on this. I understand this, and we have to be aware of it. Not everybody out there understands the importance with knowing personal information about somebody else. You got to be careful of that. You hear me on that? Not everybody understands the enormous responsibility that comes with knowing personal information about somebody else. I wish they did. And so you do have to be careful out there. When somebody tells you something in private, you have been given that in stewardship, which means it doesn't belong to you. You just manage it. And stewardship means we will one day give an account. But when someone gives you something that's private and personal, they have done so in stewardship. And we need to understand there's an enormous responsibility that comes with that, and we need to guard that with all our might. Be careful about gossip. Be careful about being disloyal. Those are 5 quick ones, and there may be many more that are destructive to relationship, but in many ways, those are 5 big ones if you think about it. 5 of what I'd say are the ones that come up the most often and are the most destructive in relationships, in which I ask you, do you have any relationships in your life that have some of that in them? Or maybe even more, is there one you struggle with? Which one do you struggle with on that list? Because if we're going to have healthy relationships, do life together, get to know each other more, have trusting, authentic relationships, we can't allow those things into our relationships. They're too dangerous. Now, real quickly, I want to turn a corner, though, and ask the question, well, then what did Jesus say about friendships? Did he have anything to say about friendships? Because being a disciple means becoming like Jesus more and more in all we do. So what did Jesus have to say about friendships? Well, one particular area that he talked about it was in John chapter 15. John chapter 15, he said this in verse 12. He says, my command is this: love each other as I have loved you. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I've learned from my Father, I have made known to you. Now, real quickly, what are some things that we can unpack from that passage that are important for us to know? And the first one seems so simple and it's so obvious, but it is so important and a lot of people struggle with. And it's this: Jesus wants to be your friend. Do you know that? And yet so many Christians struggle with this. Do you think of Jesus as your friend? Do you have a friendship with Jesus? Jesus wants to be your friend. And the first thing we need to understand then about that friendship and what Jesus would say a friendship is this: love requires vulnerability. Love requires that you be vulnerable. It means putting yourself out there. Weaknesses and all, it doesn't matter. It means being transparent in all you do. It means being authentic in your conversations and who you are and what you do, that you're being real with other people. You're transparent with them, no matter if it's a good thing or if it's something you struggle with. You've got to be vulnerable in those relationships. And Jesus was open and vulnerable with his friends. He said, everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. In other words, I've told you all my secrets. What you see is what you get. I've shared all of this with you, but here's the problem with vulnerability, and I think some of you have probably figured that out already in life. When you put yourself out there, when you're transparent, when you make yourself vulnerable, you have made yourself wide open for attack. When you're vulnerable, when you're transparent, you are wide open for attack. And it happened to Jesus, by the way. This conversation he was having with his disciples was on the night he was going to be arrested. And he got arrested and all his friends scattered for the hills, and Peter denied him 3 times. When you put yourself out there, you risk being attacked. And yet you can't have love without vulnerable relationships, which means this: love, it can be a risk. It can be a risk. Risk means putting yourself in danger. Understanding that there is danger. We need to understand that it's danger. But one of the temptations for many of us is to say, you know what? I did put myself out there. I did become transparent. I opened myself up, and that person used it against me. They hurt me, and I'll be darned if that's going to happen again. And we put up walls and we put up defenses and we say nobody in. And you know what? I'm just going to move towards bitterness and cynicism because I'll be darned if I'm going to get hurt again. But when we do that, we rob ourselves and rip ourselves off from understanding what genuine, true, authentic, transparent love is according to Jesus. And what Jesus said is this: friendship requires sacrifice. Jesus said, no greater love than this, than to lay down your life for your friends. To put their wants, needs, and desires above yours. To be transparent, to be vulnerable with them. And what Jesus was teaching them is Jesus would ultimately do that. Jesus would ultimately lay down his life for all of us. When, let's face it, we were all bad friends. That's the story of the Bible. None of us were born good friends of God. We've all done many things. Those 5 things we talked about that hurt relationships and hurt other people and strain those healthy relationships, if we're all honest, we've done them all. We've been bad friends, and yet what Jesus says is no greater love than to lay down your life for your friends, that even though we were sinners, even though that we were bad friends, he laid down his life for us. And in doing so, he taught us something that's going to be so important in our relationships too. If we're not going to be the sort of people that put up walls, if we're not going to allow bitterness and cynicism to be in our lives, if we're going to allow ourselves to have healthy friendships and allow them to develop in the good times and the bad times, we begin to realize that that we're going to need something in that relationship that is so unique to Christians, that is at the core of what we believe, but you will find is also foundational for building strong, healthy relationships everywhere around you, and that's this: only the supernatural power of forgiveness can sustain our relationships. Only the supernatural power of forgiveness can sustain our relationships. And you say, Jason, what do you mean by that? What do you mean only that can sustain our relationships? And what I'm saying is this: when you choose to go down a road of bitterness and cynicism, when you put walls up because you've been hurt and say, I'm not going to allow anybody in, when you do that, it hardens you. You become somebody you never imagined you could be. You lose intimacy. You don't want to go down that road. Maybe you already have. See, what Jesus was telling us about friendship is this: you have a choice you can make, and that choice is you can choose to forgive. That's what's so unique about Christianity. See, God chose to forgive us when we were bad friends. And he says, you know what? You have the same choice. When someone hurts you, when they betray you, when they do something that devalues you, you can choose to forgive. And that forgiveness can overcome. And so I ask you, is there somebody in your life, a relationship somewhere that you need to forgive? And I want to be clear, we don't have time to go in this completely. Forgiveness doesn't mean the relationship gets to go back exactly where it was, okay? That's not what forgiveness means. Forgiveness says, I refuse to allow bitterness, anger, hate, cynicism in my life. I refuse to be hardened by it. I refuse to become something that I don't want to look at in the mirror. Forgiveness says that it stops here at the cross. That I love you. While things may not go back to the way they were, I'm not going to allow that bitterness in my life. And so I ask you, is there somebody you need to forgive? Is there a relationship in which you need to forgive?